ahead and let's get started. First off, hopefully everyone's here for the Resume and LaTex workshop. So just a quick introduction. My name is Divyank. I am the Professional Development Chair for ACM. Basically, my job is to make sure your resume is good to go, and also to help you with internships and maybe full-time jobs. However, with the current market, that may or may not be good for you. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's get started. Keep in mind that this will be a part of a career readiness series. So this is going to be a series of 8 workshops that we're going to be doing on a weekly basis throughout the quarter, each time on Thursday from 4 to roughly 5:30 to 6 p.m. There's going to be kind of 2 parts to each workshop. The first part is going to be more so kind of talking about, some tips and tricks as to maybe how you can improve certain parts of your professional career and, different parts of different segments of your professional career. So for example, how can you improve your resume, your portfolio? How do you make your websites? How do you prepare your LinkedIn GitHubs? Things like that, right? How do you find opportunities for internships, things like that. And then the second part is more so going to be focusing on actually implementing these things, right? Because it's one thing to, talk about these things, be able to understand how these things work, but it's also very important that we're able to implement these ideas into our own resumes, into our own portfolios, and be able to execute on these ideas so that we are able to secure those internships and jobs. Yes? Okay, cool. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's get started. Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking about a few key ideas. So we're going to get started off with what exactly a resume is, what the purpose of a resume is, and then we'll also dive into what exactly LaTex is, because I'm pretty sure most of us are hearing it for the first time. Raise your hand if you're hearing LaTex for the first time. Okay, quite a few hands, yeah. So we'll definitely dive into how we can work with LaTex and why it's so useful as compared to other alternatives for it. And then we'll also talk about what an ATS is. How many of us have heard of an ATS? Oh, for sure. Okay, not a problem. Yeah, so we'll definitely talk about why an ATS exists and why we need to consider it when we're writing our resumes and why it's so important within the application process. And then after that, we'll kind of dive deeper into how exactly your resume should be looking, right? Obviously, the format that we will be giving won't be a hard format, right? It won't matter, if you have some slight differences in terms of your formatting, right? Remember that it is completely up to you. However, we will be giving some tips as to how perhaps you can optimize the amount of space that you're using and ensuring that your resume fits the requirements and that you're able to efficiently use all of your space there. And then kind of going with that, we'll also be talking about how you can better your chances of passing the initial resume screening, right? So with that being said, let's go ahead, let's move on. So we'll start off with a quick introduction. So we'll start off with what exactly resumes are and what LaTex is. So how many of us know what a resume is? Cool, so everyone, right? Okay, so a resume is essentially just a summary of your professional experiences, right? So for example, they may include your past experiences. So perhaps, different clubs you've worked with, or perhaps, internships or research positions that you've worked with. And in those sections, you're going to talk about what you did within those organizations, right? So perhaps maybe you wrote some code for them, perhaps you organized some events or some workshops for them and whatnot, right? And in addition to that, you're also going to talk about your education. So what year you are, what major you are, things like that, right? And then as we mentioned before, you can talk about your employers, right? Both research and industry, and then also kind of what projects you've talked about, right? The project section is something that's really tailored more towards CS, especially since with CS, with the realm of CS, it's really easy to implement a project as compared to some of the other fields, right? And that's something that you guys should really be focusing on throughout your initial careers is, even though you may not have, experiences professional experiences, it's always good to have some projects to kind of show that even though you may not have had internships or, full-time positions, you still have the technical capabilities to be able to perform well in those positions. And last but not least, we're going to talk about various skills and technologies and how to place them out. So with that being said, then we come on to the second part, which is going to be LaTex. So LaTex is a document preparation editor software, kind of similar to, say, Google Docs or Microsoft Word, right? So how many of us have our resumes on Microsoft Word or Google Docs right now? Okay, which is fine for now. However, with LaTex, we'll kind of be able to enhance a lot of our resume, not only in terms of the formatting, but also just how internally it's formatted within the PDF format, right? And LaTex uses a certain programming language called LaTeX, and it's kind of like a programming language, but more so it's going to kind of be very similar to Markdown, right? So how many of us are familiar with the Markdown language? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So as we know that Markdown helps us format our content, right? So we're able to specify different types of headers, bullet points, subheadings, tables, things like that, right? So with LaTeX, we'll also be able to do essentially the same things. And a lot of your classes will also probably be using LaTeX later on, right? I think for most of us, the first kind of encounter with it is going to be CS 111, right? Where you'll be required to do all of your homework assignments in LaTeX. And later on, as you progress through more of your upper div classes, you guys will be required to use LaTeX for your homework assignments. So it's always great to just kind of get started early on. This way, you're not struggling to focus on like how to work LaTeX later on, and you can just kind of work on the materials for the class itself, right? And then we have overleaf.com. So how many of us have heard of Overleaf for those who use LaTeX? Okay, for sure. So Overleaf is kind of like your online editor, right? So it's kind of different in terms of like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. For those technologies, the editor and I guess kind of like the language itself is kind of built into one package, right? However, here it's a little bit different. You can use the programming language outside of Overleaf. However, Overleaf kind of just provides like a cloud-based solution for all of your like LaTeX needs, right? So you can kind of think of it as Google Docs for LaTeX. Yeah. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. Let's go ahead. Let's move on then. Okay, so then we come on to what an ATS is. And ATS is essentially a CS student's worst nightmare. Reason being is, first off, it stands for Applicant Tracking System. And this is what your resume will initially go through, right? So when you submit your resume, it won't go directly to a recruiter, right? Unless it's like a very small company, right? Most of the times it's going to go through the ATS, which will kind of scan your resume and ensure that you are semi-qualified for the job, right? It will check for some keywords, ensuring that you have the proper requirements for the job. And if you pass those requirements, then you will be allowed to move on to the next stage, which perhaps maybe where you might have your resume looked at by a recruiter, or perhaps you may receive an OA, which is an online assessment, like an online coding assessment, or you may just straight up have an in-person interview with them, right? However, in most companies, the ATS is going to be the first step that you have to pass, right? And if you don't pass the step, then immediately you are going to be rejected, right? So how many of us have heard maybe their upperclassmen friends say like, oh, I've been auto-rejected from this company and blah, 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 blah. Oh, no? Okay. Okay, so if you guys have heard of like someone being auto-rejected, right? Or perhaps getting a rejection email for an internship or, like some sort of position very close to the application timeline. So for example, like, let's say you applied this morning, right? And you receive a rejection letter like a few hours later, right? Clearly, that means that you didn't pass the ATS scanner, right? Otherwise, you would have passed and you would have, either perhaps maybe received that rejection letter after a recruiter has seen it, right? But there is essentially no way for a recruiter to have been able to see your resume within a few hours and be able to say that, hey, this applicant is not qualified, let's reject them, right? So this is kind of where that auto-rejected like slang or term comes from, right? And as we kind of mentioned before, essentially what the ATS is going to do is it's just going to parse your resume. So it's going to check for, are you a student, right? Because a lot of the positions you guys might be applying to will be student positions, right? And if you're applying to full-time positions, then obviously they want to make sure that you are, or you have graduated or you will be graduating within, perhaps the next quarter or so, right? And yeah, and then once you have passed that, then you will go ahead and move on. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's talk about the different sections of your resume. So the overall layout, now, as I mentioned before, this isn't like a very concrete layout that you have to use, right? This is kind of like a good starting place for you guys to create your resume and be able to showcase all the different things that you guys have. So first off, who are you, right? What is your name? And perhaps, what are some ways that that the recruiter or like the company can contact you, right? Do you have like a phone number or perhaps an email that they can contact you directly? Do you have, some social media presence? So for example, do you have a LinkedIn? Do you have a GitHub? Do you have maybe like a personal website that they can access and kind of gain more information about you outside of your resume? And then from there, then we come on to the education section, right? So, like what university do you go to? What major are you? What year are you? Perhaps, what are some relevant coursework that you have taken that may apply to the job that you're applying for, and so on, right? And then we come on to the skills section. So what are some technologies or frameworks that you have worked with? So for example, a lot of us would say, perhaps, we've worked with C++ or Python, right? These would be some examples of some skills or like technologies that we have used, right? And then we have projects, right? Yeah, we'll talk about this when we get to the experiences part. So what are some projects you've worked with, right? These don't have to be, very large scale projects, especially since most of you guys will be just starting your resumes. It's completely okay to have, maybe just 1 or 2 projects. But the key thing is you really want to highlight, that during these projects, you were able to explore new technologies or really build out like a fleshed out application, right? And yeah, and also, if you do have any group projects, those are always more beneficial just because it shows your ability to collaboratively work with other people in your development team, right? And then we come on to the experiences section, right? So the reason it says swappable with projects is sometimes when you're initially starting out, right? Sometimes your projects may be a better showcase of your technical abilities than say your experiences, right? Reason being is sometimes a lot of our experiences may be, perhaps from like high school or perhaps from, various like restaurants and like retail jobs that we have had, right? And they're not usually very technical focused, right? So that's why in a lot of cases, you will see many resumes where the project section is above the experiences. And that's completely fine, right? Later on, when you do have more technical related experiences, it would be advised that you would put your experiences above your project section, yeah? Okay, yeah, and then the key thing with your resumes is that you kind of want to have a top-down format, right? So what that means is your recruiter or whoever is reading your resume, they're going to start at the top of your resume. They're going to see your name, your contact information, the skills, projects, or experiences, and then move on down from there, right? Obviously, you don't want to confuse the recruiter, right? You kind of want to guide them slowly throughout your resume, and you'll notice that a lot of like resume guidelines will say not to have columns, right? Because what do columns do when you're reading some sort of text, right? For example, imagine we had like column on a left-hand side and a column on the right-hand side. What does that kind of do for the reader? Anyone? Yeah, it kind of makes the reader jump around, right? So it's a little bit confusing for the recruiter as how exactly to interpret your resume, right? So that's why always try your best to keep a top-down format and avoid as many columns as possible. Yeah? Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so first things first, we kind of come on to the first section, which is the like, who exactly are you and how do I contact you, right? Kind of mentioned this before, but just putting some general information out there, like what is your name? What is your phone number? Again, this is an optional the phone number is optional just because sometimes if your resume is published publicly online, then you may run into issues with like spam calls. So there is like a slight, I guess, like privacy issue with that. So it is completely optional to you guys. However, I would recommend definitely putting some sort of email. This way they do have a direct contact with you, right? One thing to keep in mind is how many of us have an email where we receive a lot of spam? Okay, cool. Yeah. So in that case, what I would recommend is create a separate professional email where you kind of store all of your professional and like career related emails, right? So anytime you guys are applying to new jobs, you guys should get like all confirmation emails or like all checkups and everything within the process inside of that separate email, right? Reason being is a lot of the times, if you were to put it into your primary email where you have all of that spam, it's really easy to accidentally skip over really important emails where you may have missed certain deadlines, right? And especially with the application process, it's really important that we're on top of our deadlines. Reason being is a lot of the emails that you'll be receiving are kind of timed. So for example, if you receive an online assessment for coding, right, you may have only like say 7 or 10 days from the email or like from the email timestamp in order to complete that assessment, right? So that's something that you definitely don't want to be missing out and realizing like 5 days later that, oh, hey, like I have an online assessment that I need to do, right? Yeah, and then we have the personal portfolio / website. So how many of us have a personal website so far? Okay, not a lot of us. Okay, that is okay. That is definitely one of the few things that you guys should definitely be working on. It is definitely a great first project to get started on. One, because you get to create something outside of your resume, right? It gets to showcase who you are as an individual outside of your technical capabilities, right? You get to talk about your hobbies, what you like to do in your free time, maybe what type of music or movies and TV shows you like to listen to. Gives a deeper dive into like your personality and character as a whole, right? Otherwise, all computer science students are like, hey, I've taken data structures and algorithms, I've taken operating systems, I've taken object-oriented programming and like machine learning, right? And that's pretty much like every computer science student's resume, right? But obviously, these recruiters, they're looking for someone who stands out, right? They want someone who fits well with the team, right? And that personal website kind of helps them give a deeper dive into who you are, yeah? Okay, and then we also have your GitHub and your LinkedIn profiles, right? The LinkedIn, obviously, that's kind of like a generic professional, I guess, social media, right? Where you get to post about all of your professional experiences, and connect with different people online and whatnot, right? I think a lot of us have a LinkedIn profile already, yeah? Okay, yeah. If you guys don't, I would definitely recommend creating one. And the same goes for GitHub. For GitHub, you guys actually will be required to use your own for CS100 if you guys haven't already, right? And GitHub is kind of like is a CS version of LinkedIn, basically, right? This is where you guys will be able to showcase all of the projects that you've worked on, both individually and with teams, right? And it kind of gives the recruiters a deeper dive into how exactly you code, right? Are there certain measures that you take to ensure that your code doesn't break, right? So for example, do you have certain guidelines that you must follow whenever you are pushing code, right? Are there certain methodologies that you use? So for example, are there certain design patterns that you're implementing within your code, right? Things like that, right? Because when you're coding in industry, your recruiters want to make sure that you are able to adhere to their guidelines, right? They don't want you to just be kind of coding away and just writing whatever, right? They want to make sure that you're able to write efficient code and write clean and readable code. Yeah? Okay, any questions on that? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it's been asked before, but when you talk about projects, does the projects that we go through during our time here count, or is it just like personal projects?
Great question. That's kind of up to you. So if you think your project's done within the classes here, right? So for example, like I think CS100 is kind of the most notable, or like the first entry project that everyone kind of has, right? So it's completely okay to put UCR affiliated projects. Obviously, just check with the professors, because sometimes there are some guidelines as to where you can't post code regarding UCR projects. Oh, I'll go over that in a minute. Yeah, but yeah, just keep that in mind. Make sure that if you are pushing code regarding UCR classes or UCR projects, make sure you have permission from the instructor that you are allowed to do this and you are allowed to kind of share that project, right? Because sometimes there are what's it called, like kind of NDA requirements I have heard this with other schools, so that's why it is something to watch out for. But I think UCR is pretty relaxed with it. So it is completely fine to do that as long as you have like the authority to do so. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, yes. And then the other thing that Ashley was talking about is if you guys don't have projects, definitely join hackathons, right? So how many of us know of QT Hack? When is QT Hack? Huh?
November 5th.
There we go. That's when QT Hack is. And do you want to talk about QT Hack? What is QT Hack? Is it Q?
Yes, it's a hackathon happening November 5th. There'll be workshops and prizes and food, and it's a 12-hour time limit to code, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. You could come out, we'll help you find teams if you don't have teams, lots of prize categories, lots of fun. I'll see you there.
Yeah.
Yes, it is innovation, about illuminate your passion. Yeah. There's not really prizes that goes, there's like one prize that goes with the theme, but for the most part, it's like best hardware, best UI UX, first, second, third. 2 weeks before June half.
Okay, and then we also have we have a hackathon each quarter, right? There's one in winter. Anyone know what that hackathon is? What hackathon is that, Ashley?
And it's happening January 14th through 15th. Is 24 hours. QT Hack is like a great way to like step your foot into hackathon if you've never been to one, because it's like for a shorter duration. But Rose Hack in the winter is 24 hours. The same process, like you have 24-hour hacking window, and then we have prizes in the end. I'll have to our theme for Rose Hack this year is arcade, and so we will have a prize, I think, catering towards that theme. Like it'll be like project for like best project for the shenanigans. That one is.
Yeah, and then
Pages will open October
12. And then we also have a hackathon in spring. Anyone know what the spring one is? Yes. Oh, did you say it?
It's a citrus hack.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, you already know it. I can ask someone else. Anyways, anyone know what citrus hack is?
So same deal as QT Hack for 24 hours, and it's the spring hackathon, so like April 1st and 2nd.
Yeah, so you have a hackathon each quarter, right? And these are great opportunities to be able to not only create your own projects, either individually or with teams, right? But it's also just a great way to learn new technologies, because during these hackathons, you will have mentors who will be able to help you learn these new technologies that you may want to use within your projects, right? And also just kind of to network with new developers and be able to just kind of build upon your current skill sets. Yeah. Okay, cool. Any questions? Yeah.
Oh, for the QT Hack one, are the questions like easier than like Rose Hack? Or like does it vary?
What do you mean by question?
How's it?
Are you asking like themes? Like,
Yeah, how does it even work? I have no.
oh, he's asking like, how do the categories for the hackathons work?
Okay, yeah, you can code anything. You can make a website, a little app, some kind of hardware thing, like literally anything. And then there's a lot of prize categories that tailor to them or also general, like you can just do like first place, second place, third place. So you could create anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there will be like a theme. So like, for example, for QT Hack, it's like illuminate your passion. And then for Rose Hack, it's like an arcade, right? So usually it'll be, it's not like hard set that you have to create your project towards that theme, but usually like you have a better chance of winning if it's usually catered towards that theme. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and let's move on then. Okay, so this is kind of a sample. So this is from like my resume. So just to kind of show you guys how it's formatted, right? So for example, I have who I am at the top, right? And then a bunch of different links at the bottom, right? So I have like my phone number, my professional email, personal website, GitHub, and LinkedIn, right? The icons there, they're just there for like anything but text, right? Just to kind of make it look pretty. Obviously, they're not required, but one key thing to keep in mind here is it is kind of hard to tell right now, but they are all linkable, right? So what that means is if I were to click on, one of these links or like one of these text boxes, it would actually link me to the respective site, right? And that's really useful is because when your recruiter is looking through your resume and they want to check out your other like portfolios and whatnot, it's one less click for them or less digging around for the recruiter, right? Because otherwise what they would have to do is they'd have to like kind of search up your name like Divyank Shah space GitHub and then try to find your profile, right? But here, since it's linkable, they'll have direct access to it, yeah? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then we come on to the education system or the education section, right? So where exactly do you go to school and like information regarding that, right? So since all of us are students, this is kind of an important section just because we are going to be putting, or a lot of the applications that we're going to be putting in are going to be tailored towards student positions, right? And that's also another thing that we kind of want to keep in mind is when we are, or like when recruiters are looking at us, they kind of want to have like, oh, this person is a student. They are here to learn, right? They are not here to do. Or does that kind of make sense, right? Like you'll still be writing code and everything, right? But your primary purpose is that you're mostly going to be learning and kind of training yourself to be prepared for industry, right? So some common things that you want to include are like, so what school do you go to, right? And most of the times you want to spell it out completely, right? So I know especially with UCR, since it's such a long name, oftentimes we'll just abbreviate just to UCR, right? But keep in mind that UCR is a very like California term, right? Someone outside of California may not understand this term. And a lot of the times you may be applying to internship positions outside of California, right? So that's why it's very important that you guys spell out the entire school name. So you say University of California, Riverside, yeah? Okay, and then we come on to the degree type and major. So for example, like Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. Obviously, if you're, for example, like a data science major, then you put data science or like CE or like CSBA and whatnot. Once again, make sure that you spell it out, right? Because a lot of these majors, they aren't common in other schools, right? So for example, like CSBA, right? That is perhaps not a major that you can find at every school, right? So it wouldn't really attack the ATS very nicely, just because when it's looking for CSBA, it's not going to find anything, right? Because that is only like a UCR term, right? When we're writing our resumes, we kind of want to make it general so that any recruiter and any ATS can kind of understand, oh, I know what a computer science degree is, right? Or I know what a like computer science with business applications degree is, right? Does that kind of make sense? Okay, cool. And then we come on to relevant coursework. So key thing here is that you guys only want to be including your past classes, right? Reason being is with past classes, it's kind of like things that your recruiter can ask you about, right? And this can pop up during like the interviews, right? So for example, if you put a class that you're currently taking, right? The recruiter can definitely ask you about concepts from that class, right? And this is kind of where you put yourself in an iffy situation where you may or may not be able to answer their questions, right? And at that point, you don't seem very confident about the content that you do know, right? So it's always best that you put content that you already know or like classes you have already taken, yeah? Okay, cool. And then obviously make sure that you guys include your start date and your expected graduation. This is more so for internship eligibility. A lot of internships will only allow you to, apply if you are, for example, like a sophomore or junior standing in college. Sometimes there may be requirements such that you must have at least 1 year of schooling left after the internship, or perhaps you must graduate after say 2024 or perhaps before 2024, right? So there are certain restrictions like that putting the start date and your expected graduation date kind of helps you get around that. Lastly, for your GPA, it is optional. There's usually they won't be looking at your GPA. There are some internships that do require like a certain GPA standard. So for example, they will only accept students who have say like a 3.0 or higher, right? So definitely look out for that. However, it is not completely required. And this kind of depends for everyone, right? If you think you want to put your GPA up there, then definitely go for it. Otherwise, you don't have to. Yeah, any questions? Okay, cool. All right, let's move on. Okay, so this is just kind of a sample of how that would look like formatted, right? So you have school name, degree type, and what degree it is, relevant coursework, and then the location of the school, and then finally start and expected graduation dates. All right, let's go ahead, let's move on. Okay. Okay, so then we come on to skills and technologies that we use, right? So first off, we have, or there's kind of like three categories that these can come under, right? So first off, we have programming languages, right? These are the programming languages you guys have probably already been working with, right? So like C++, Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, Rust, Ruby, things like that, right? And a lot of these will probably come from your classes. Key thing here is just make sure that you list them in terms of your expertise or preference, right? So for example, if you list, say, C++ first, then it's kind of expected that, you know, when you are doing your technical interviews and whatnot, that you will be coding in C++, right? And it also just kind of goes to show how like proficient and which language you're comfortable using, right? So for example, if you're applying for a, I don't know, like a Python backend developer job, right? Then you probably don't want to have like low-level languages in there, right? Or like at the front of your list, right? You don't want to have like C++, Verilog, or like assembly at the start, right? Perhaps you want to have Python, which is a little bit more tailored towards the job that you're going to be applying for. And then we also have developer tools, right? So these aren't exactly programming languages. They're more so tools that kind of help you along the development process. So for example, how many of us have heard of like Git or like GitHub? Yeah, right. So that's a very common tool that most of you guys will be using. There's also Gtest, which is a test framework. And then you have CMake, which is a build tool. And right now, these are all kind of like C++ tools, but you can imagine that if you use other tools for other languages, then this is kind of the section that you would put them in. And then finally, we kind of have just a general overall technologies and frameworks section in which you can put more broader like services that you use, right? So for example, React, which is a JavaScript library, and then you have Firebase. Under here would also come like, say, if you're using any maybe like AWS services or like any cloud services, this is the section to go ahead and do that. Any questions here? Yeah.
You mentioned if you're applying to like a Python backend job, for instance, that it makes sense that Python is versus today. Do you recommend changing this for each job you apply to? And I guess a further question would be, would you do that to other parts?
It depends. So the thing with changing it for each job is you run into the issue with, you're going to have tons of applications you're going to have to fill out, right? And if you're changing it for each one, then it's going to be a very tedious process, right? Because the numbers that you're going to be applying with are probably going to be within the hundreds, right? So if you're changing it for each one, that's something that you'll kind of have to look out for. And the other thing is, usually when you're applying for internships, hopefully you kind of have a good idea as to which internship you want to do, right? Maybe you want to do hardware, like more lower level internships, or perhaps like higher level, you know, maybe cloud internships or like more backend stuff, right? So hopefully you kind of have an idea of which one you want to do, and you can kind of tailor your resume such that it tailors what you want to do within your internship. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay, let's go ahead. Let's move on then. Okay, so then this is just kind of how it's going to look like formatted. Okay, so this is just kind of how it's going to look like formatted, right? So you have your languages. So for example, in my case, I have Python first because I feel like I'm most comfortable with Python, right? And then I have like C++, JavaScript, and so on and so on. I have some developer tools and then some technologies that I use. Yeah. Any questions there? Yeah.
So let's say you used something in a project like 2 years ago, just one time, would you put that on your resume or not? Probably not.
Probably not, just because anything you do put in here, again, is free game for your recruiter to ask, right? So if you think you still have a good enough grasp of where you can still explain and perhaps implement that tool or whatnot, then go for it. But if you think you've just completely forgotten about it, don't include it. Because they will ask you like, oh, hey, hey, I see, you've used like CMake here. Like, can you tell me a little bit about how exactly you use CMake and, perhaps how it helped you with your project? And then if you say like, CMake do be cool, right? That's not going to help you, right? Obviously, you want to tell them like, hey, oh, yeah, so CMake, was a build tool that I used to be able to compile the code that needed to be compiled, right? So it helped reduce my compilation time, and I was able to develop a little bit faster. Yeah, things like that, right? So this goes for kind of like every section on your resume, right? Anything you put is free game for your recruiter to expand on, right? That's pretty much the reason you're putting it there, right? So just be careful of that. Don't lie on your resume, because they're gonna be like, hey, I see you worked with cloud services. Can you talk about these cloud services that you used? And if you just put like jargon and things you don't understand, you won't be able to explain it. And they'll immediately know that you're lying, and they'll just reject you on the spot. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's move on then. Okay, so then we come on to professional experiences. So with professional experiences, there's a few things that we have to include. So first off, the company or organization that we're working with. And keep in mind that clubs are perfectly okay, right? So for example, like ACM, right? For let's say you do a project for ACM, right? Then you can go ahead and obviously spell out ACM, but you can say that you work for ACM, or perhaps like you work for a hackathon committee, or you work for some other on-campus club, right? Or if you had an experience with a company, then you can go ahead and put the company name, right? And then you have the location. So where was this job located, right? Was it like Riverside, California? Was it perhaps a remote location? Maybe was it out of state, something like that, right? And then you have what role were you? So maybe were you a software development intern? Were you perhaps like project manager, something like that? And how long did you spend on that project, right? Or like on that experience, right? So for example, like in this case, we have like May 2021 to May 2022. If it's an ongoing thing, then we can just go ahead and say like May 2021 to present, right? Yeah. Any questions there?
I have a question. So if you don't have so much like experience working, so you put like, I don't know, you had a job at McDonald's, should you put it, or should you only put like technical jobs that you had, like I don't know, coding or something like that?
So you're asking if like which experiences to put?
Yeah, like if you don't have that many, if you don't, I don't know, like if you only have like one job and you're trying to like fill in your resume, should you put that one job, or if it doesn't have anything to do with the job that you're applying?
It depends. So this is kind of one of those situations where you put your projects above your experiences. And if you still have space on your resume, I would still put that one job on there, just because it shows that you have professional experience in the real world, right? Because usually a lot of times the real world jobs that you're going to be working with, you're going to be working with a team, right? And usually in a fast-paced environment. So that's something that the recruiter will kind of see and see like, oh, this person has worked within the real world. They have worked in, whatever, like, whatever job position. So they understand how to deal with customers, or, maybe how to deal with certain products, things like that. Thank you. Oh, no, I need water. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, okay. And then under that is going to be bullet points covering basically what you did, right? So there are ways to to make sure that your bullet points talk about important things, right? Mainly you want to talk about what did you do there and how did that impact whatever project or like whatever thing you were working on, right? So maybe did you improve performance? Do you reduce maybe the manual labor required, things like that, right? And the other key thing is that you guys want to be utilizing unique and strong action verbs, right? So you guys don't want to be saying like, I developed a new feature, and then on the next line you say, I developed this other feature, right? Change up those verbs, make sure they're unique, make sure they kind of show or give a better description as to what exactly you did. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of a format of how that looks, right? So for example, you have the title, you have what position it was, where it was, how long that person was at the role, and then some bullet points about that role, right? And numbers are really good because it kind of tells you the scale of the project that you were working on, or of that experience that you were working with, right? So for example, if I just said, worked with developers to create full stack application, right? That may be fine, right? But if in reality I had worked with like say 30, 40 developers, right? That's a very large team, right? For a full stack application, right? And that kind of goes to show the scale at which this project was being held, right? So that's a very important thing that kind of helps give an idea of how big or how impactful your bullet point really is. Yeah? Any questions? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then we come on to the project section. So here, kind of very similar to the experiences. You're gonna have the project name, what technologies you guys use, so kind of what your tech stack was, what were your personal contributions. So sometimes in a group project, obviously you can't say like, let's say the group project was to create like a task scheduler, right? You can't say, I built a task scheduler, right? If it was like a group of 4, right? Obviously you probably did parts of the project, right? So you can say like, I built, I don't know, the back end of that project, or I built the front end, right? Things like that, right? And then I'd always recommend putting a link to the GitHub repo or the deployed project. Usually I would recommend the GitHub repo just because it is one link, and inside of the GitHub repo, you can link the actual deployed version, right? Because sometimes the recruiter is more interested in not what the actual product looks like, but more so, how did you implement this product, right? And then lastly, since many of you guys will have multiple projects, try your best to include variety. So sometimes many of your projects may be overlapping. So for example, you guys may have multiple front-end projects, right? So maybe try avoiding that and introduce some new projects, right? Maybe introduce some embedded systems projects, or perhaps a full stack application, or mobile app development, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. And then this is just kind of format of that. So you have project name, the tech stack used, some bullet points talking about personal contributions, and then a GitHub link that takes you, and once again, this GitHub link is linkable. So if you click on it, it will take you to that GitHub repository and go from there. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So then we come on to kind of just general tips for the resume. Yeah. So first things first is kind of I guess the meat of your resume is really going to be in your bullet points, right? Talking about what you did and how it impacted what you did, or like what team you were working with, or what product you were working on, right? So you want to start with kind of what you start with a unique, strong action verb, right? So kind of like what you did in a way, right? So perhaps you spearheaded a team, right? Perhaps you fabricated some new features, right? Maybe you standardized the development process, or you streamlined the like API calls or something like that, right? And then you want to kind of provide the methods of implementation, right? So how exactly did you do this? Were there some technologies that you had to implement in order to actually make sure these features work, right? So for example, we could have just said display analytics, right? That would have given the recruiter an idea of like, okay, this person displayed some sort of analytics, maybe they had some charts, but there's no good idea as to how exactly they did this, right? Maybe did they just spit numbers at the user, or did they provide some graphs? Maybe was there some sort of UI that the user could interact with? How exactly did they do this? The recruiter would be very confused. However, if we were to implement our technologies and kind of showcase how we were able to display those analytics, then the user has a better, or the recruiter has a better idea as to how these were done, right? So in this case, like with InfluxDB and Grafana, the recruiter is now able to know that, oh, hey, I know what these tools are. I have perhaps used them or heard about them. And I kind of know an idea of how exactly these tools help visualize things. Yeah? Okay. And then you want to provide quantitative evidence. So like, why did you do this, right? Why did you feel the need to do this issue? Was there something that benefited? Were you able to perhaps reduce like memory usage by 20%, or perhaps increase like outreach or something like that, right? And usually here you want to put your numbers, right? Put some sort of metric that allows the recruiter to understand the scale at which your contribution helped, right? So like, for example, in the first bullet point, reduce memory usage by 20%, right? So that kind of helps the recruiter understand that whatever they were working on, it helped reduce their overall like memory usage. And as a result, it perhaps would make their application faster, or just in general, much smaller to deal with, right? So it's much more portable and whatnot, right? And obviously you guys want to be avoiding pronouns. So you guys don't want to say like, I developed, or like, we developed, or like my teammate developed this while I developed that, right? Just jump straight into it. Just be like, just be like, streamlined this process, or developed this, fabricated this, right? And so on, right? Just because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to have I at the start of every bullet point, and that's not useful, right? That's just a waste of space. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so let's try it out. So with all the things that we've kind of gone over, right? So let's say we have a project that we worked on, right? And it was a task scheduler. And I'm writing this for my resume, right? And what I did was, personally, I worked on the backend components. And some things I did were, I got some data from MongoDB, which through an API, right? If you guys don't know what these technologies are, that's completely okay. Pretend you do. And then go from there, right? And the main thing that we want to focus on here is I improved very slow API calls by caching data locally in the front end, right? So how do you guys think we can kind of combine this and maybe improve it such that first we're able to implement it all in one bullet point, but at the same time be able to show what we worked on, how we worked on it, and perhaps what the impact was? Any ideas? Yeah, go for it.
Maybe for the improved so you can pose like put like some sort of percentage to help like understand about how we can improve the program.
Yeah, that definitely we need some sort of metric here as well, right? Yeah, so let's go ahead, let's go over to the next slide and kind of see one way to do this, right? Obviously, there are multiple ways to do this. There is no correct answer to it, right? So for example, here, this is one way to write it, right? So cache data to improve MongoDB API response time by greater than like 500 milliseconds, right? So remember that your metrics always don't have to be in percentages, right? Sometimes time can also be a very useful metric for you, right? Sometimes, especially when you're dealing with APIs, right? Reducing maybe your network payload, right? Which is essentially like how big your response is. That can also be one thing, right? So that can be in a unit of storage, right? So perhaps like reduce network payload by, I don't know, like 1 gigabyte or something like that, right? Or you can do time, for example, like in this case, milliseconds. Yeah. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. Let's go ahead. Let's move on. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the presentation. So just a few things to, I guess, kind of keep in mind, or I guess for like future stuff is, this is an ACM event and like an ACM series. So if you guys want to come out to more ACM events, feel free. We do be the largest computer science organization on campus. We have a bunch of workshops, events, socials, projects throughout the year that you guys can attend. So definitely come check those out. And then feel free to check out our website as well if you guys want to learn more about what are the different events that we host, and join the Discord server if you guys haven't already. But with that being said, we have, I think, yeah, we have exactly like an hour or so remaining. So what I would recommend is get started on your own resumes and start building that out. In terms of the LaTex part and how to get that set up. First off, make sure you guys are able to sign in with overleaf.com. You guys should be able to sign in with Google directly, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then this is kind of up to you guys. You guys can start from scratch if you guys want to. That will be a very tedious process, so do keep that in mind. The other way and kind of faster way would be to use a resume template and go from there, right? If you guys are looking to apply this application season, I would start with the template just because application season has already opened and is currently ongoing and also closing very soon. So yeah, so we'll kind of just open up that hour for you guys to work on your resumes, and then I can walk around, help you guys out if you guys feel stuck or have any additional questions about your own personal resumes. Yeah. Yeah.
You're gonna post those slides somewhere?
Yeah, we're going to post the slides as well. And then if you guys want access to the resume that I posted here, you guys can visit it on my website. It do be hosted there. But so if you guys just go to like shah.divyank.github.io, there's a resume button that you guys can press and it'll have the entire resume. So if you guys want like a sample resume to look at, feel free to look at that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Otherwise, feel free to get started on your resumes.